The Galactic Council chambers had never seen such unanimous celebration. Representatives from 1,200 civilized worlds stood in perfect harmony, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of joy that resonated through the crystalline walls of the station orbiting Centauri Prime. Admiral Kexthal of the Centauri Defense Fleet raised his 6 arms in triumph as the holographic displays showed the final destruction of the last pirate stronghold in the Outer Rim. "Today marks the end of lawlessness in our galaxy," Kexthal announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led the greatest military campaign in galactic history. After 3 centuries of coordinated effort, every criminal organization, every rogue faction, every threat to civilized space has been eliminated. The assembled delegates erupted in celebration. The Vordhack delegation clicked their chitinous appendages in rhythmic approval. The crystalline ethereals hummed in perfect pitch harmonies. Even the usually stoic Cronin Empire representatives allowed themselves small nods of satisfaction. Dr. Yila Chevron, the Council's chief xenobiologist, and arguably the most respected scientific mind in the galaxy, stepped forward to address the assembly. Her 3 eyes focused on the central podium as her tentacled form glided gracefully across the speaking platform. "This victory represents more than military success," she began, her melodious voice carrying across the chamber. "It represents the triumph of civilization over chaos, of cooperation over conflict, of intelligence over brute force. We have proven that rational beings can create a perfect society when they work together toward common goals." The celebration continued for hours. Trade agreements were signed. Scientific exchanges were formalized. Cultural programs were established. The galaxy had never been more united, more prosperous, or more secure. The Council's enforcement fleets patrolled every sector with clockwork precision. Crime rates had dropped to statistical zero. Conflicts between member worlds had been resolved through diplomacy and economic incentives. In the research sectors of Centauri Prime, scientists worked on projects that would have seemed like magic to their ancestors. Faster-than-light communication networks connected every inhabited world instantly. Medical technology had eliminated most diseases and extended lifespans across all species. Environmental restoration programs had healed damaged worlds and created garden planets where life flourished in carefully maintained balance. The military academies taught conflict resolution and peacekeeping rather than warfare. The last generation of students to study actual combat tactics had graduated decades ago. Modern officers focused on logistics, diplomacy, and maintaining the vast technological infrastructure that kept their perfect society running smoothly. Admiral Kexthal returned to his private quarters aboard the flagship Eternal Harmony, feeling more satisfied than he had in years. The ship itself was a marvel of engineering, designed not for battle but for inspiring awe and demonstrating the advanced capabilities of the unified galactic civilization. Its hull gleamed with bioluminescent panels that created beautiful light patterns visible from planetary surfaces. Its weapon systems existed primarily for ceremonial displays during diplomatic visits. As he reviewed the final reports from the campaign against the Black Star Consortium, the last remaining pirate organization, Kexthal felt a deep sense of completion. The Black Star leaders had been captured alive and were now undergoing rehabilitation on Progressive Colony 7, where advanced psychological techniques would help them become productive members of society. Their followers had been offered amnesty and job training. Even their ships had been converted into cargo vessels and medical transports. "Computer, display galactic threat assessment," Kexthal commanded as he settled into his meditation chamber. The holographic display showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy, with every known star system color-coded according to threat levels. Green dominated the display, indicating peaceful, law-abiding civilizations. A few yellow markers showed minor disputes being resolved through council mediation. Not a single red marker remained anywhere in the galaxy. "Assessment complete," the computer's pleasant voice announced. "No active threats to galactic security detected. All known aggressive species have been successfully integrated into council framework or relocated to rehabilitation colonies. Recommendation: reduce military patrols to minimum maintenance levels and redirect resources to cultural development programs." Kexthal smiled, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. The recommendation made sense. Why maintain a massive military when there was nothing left to fight? The resources could be better used for art projects, scientific research, or expanding the already impressive social welfare programs that ensured every citizen of the galaxy lived in comfort, and security. Meanwhile, in the deep space monitoring stations scattered throughout the galaxy's edge, automated sensors performed their routine sweeps of the cosmic background radiation. These stations had been built during the early days of galactic expansion, when unknown threats might emerge from the vast darkness between galaxies. Now they served mainly as navigational beacons and communication relays. Station Omega 7, positioned at the outermost edge of the galactic spiral arm, had not detected anything more threatening than a small asteroid in over 50 years. The station's AI systems had become so sophisticated that they rarely required biological oversight. Most of the monitoring was handled by advanced algorithms that could identify and catalog thousands of different types of cosmic phenomena. On this particular day, as the galaxy celebrated its final triumph over chaos, the sensors of Station Omega 7 detected something unusual. A faint energy signature was approaching from the void between galaxies, moving at significant but sublight speed. The signature was unlike anything in the comprehensive databases compiled over centuries of galactic exploration. The station's AI analyzed the readings for several hours before determining that the signature most closely matched the profile of a large artificial construct. However, the material composition seemed inconsistent with any known galactic technology. The energy output patterns suggested primitive fusion drives rather than the clean antimatter systems used by all civilized species. Following standard protocols, the AI flagged the detection for review by the nearest council monitoring post. However, since the object was still several months away from entering the galaxy proper, and since it appeared to be moving slowly and showing no signs of aggressive intent, the report was filed under routine anomalies rather than sent as an urgent alert. The object continued its steady approach toward the galaxy, unknown and unnoticed by the celebrating civilizations within. Its hull was a patchwork of different materials, some gleaming metal, others appearing to be composite ceramics, and still others looking like they might be organic compounds fused into structural elements. Weapon emplacements covered its surface in seemingly random patterns, as if the entire vessel had been designed by someone who expected to fight battles from any angle. Inside the vessel, its crew went about their routines with the disciplined efficiency of beings who had spent generations traveling between the stars. They were preparing for something they had trained for their entire lives, something their parents and grandparents had prepared for before them. They called it the Long Hunt, and it was finally nearing its end. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the generation ship Indomitable, watching the long-range sensors paint their first detailed picture of their destination galaxy. The readings showed a level of technological development that exceeded their most optimistic projections. Energy signatures indicated civilizations that had mastered antimatter, quantum computing, and biological engineering far beyond anything in their databases. "Looks like we found ourselves a real challenge this time," she commented to her first officer, Commander Okafor. The bridge crew continued their preparations without missing a beat. They had known this day would come eventually. The humans had been traveling for over 200 years, following ancient signals that had reached their home system before it was destroyed. They had learned much during their journey, adapting and improving their technology, growing stronger and more capable with each passing generation. They had also learned patience, discipline, and the kind of unity that only came from facing extinction together. Their ancestors had faced the swarm wars, the AI uprising, the plague years, and the solar collapse. Each crisis had forged them into something harder, something more resilient. When their sun began showing signs of premature collapse, and their attempts to stabilize it failed, they had built their ships and headed for the stars, carrying with them everything they had learned about survival in an hostile universe. Now they were approaching a galaxy that seemed to have never learned those lessons, a galaxy that had achieved peace through comfort rather than through strength. Captain Chen studied the energy signatures and communication patterns detected by their long-range sensors. The civilizations ahead of them had built something beautiful, something that would have impressed and inspired the humans under different circumstances. But the humans had not traveled across the void between galaxies to be impressed. They had come because they needed resources, technology, and worlds to inhabit. More importantly, they had come because their deep space telescopes had detected something else moving through the cosmic darkness, something that followed destruction in its wake. The galaxy ahead of them was about to face its first real test in centuries, and the humans intended to make sure it was ready. Whether the local civilizations understood it or not, the age of easy peace was about to end. The universe was a dangerous place, and soon they would all have to remember what that meant. As the Indomitable and its accompanying fleet continued their approach, the automatic systems of Station Omega-7 dutifully recorded their progress, noting the steady acceleration and the increasing detail of their sensor readings. The AI calculated trajectory, estimated arrival time, and filed another routine report that would sit unread in the vast bureaucratic networks of the Galactic Council. In the celebration halls of Centauri Prime, the party continued into the night, marking the beginning of what everyone believed would be an eternal golden age of peace and prosperity. The greatest military minds of the galaxy toasted their final victory over violence and chaos, never knowing that they were about to face an enemy unlike anything their peaceful civilization had ever imagined. The humans were coming, and they brought with them the hard-earned wisdom of a species that had never known true peace, only the temporary quiet between storms. They carried technologies born of desperation, tactics learned through bitter experience, and an understanding of warfare that the galaxy's civilized species had deliberately chosen to forget. The ultimate test was about to begin, though only one side knew it yet. The first sign that something extraordinary was happening came not from the military monitoring stations, but from the civilian astronomers on research platform Beta 9. Dr. Nelix Vorvon, a young Cronin scientist specializing in extragalactic phenomena, had been tracking what appeared to be a small cluster of objects moving through the void beyond the galactic rim. Professor Hinth, Nelix called to her supervisor, her voice tight with confusion. These readings don't make sense. The objects are definitely artificial, but they're using fusion drives. Fusion drives, Professor. No one has used such primitive technology in over 4 centuries. Professor Hinth, an elderly Vorthak with decades of experience in deep space observation, scuttled over to examine the data. His compound eyes studied the sensor readings while his auxiliary arms manipulated the analysis controls with practiced precision. Perhaps it's debris from some ancient civilization, he suggested. There are still unexplored regions in the galactic halo where remnants of pre-council species might drift. But, Professor, look at the trajectory analysis. These objects are under intelligent control. They're making course corrections, adjusting their formation, and their energy signatures. Nelix paused, her mandibles clicking nervously. They're getting stronger. Whatever these things are, they're accelerating toward our galaxy. Professor Hinth examined the data more carefully, his scientific excitement growing despite his confusion. Submit this to the Archaeological Council. They'll want to send a research vessel to investigate. It could be the discovery of the decade. Neither scientist realized they were looking at the advanced scouts of a human fleet that had been designed for one purpose: to evaluate and prepare for the conquest of an entire galaxy. The objects they tracked were automated probe ships, launched months earlier to gather intelligence on the local civilizations and their defensive capabilities. These probes had been carefully designed to appear primitive and non-threatening, while secretly performing detailed scans of military installations, communication networks, and industrial centers. The humans had learned long ago that knowledge was the most powerful weapon, and they intended to understand their new neighbors completely before making contact. Captain Chen studied the intelligence reports flooding in from the probe network. The data painted a picture of a galaxy-spanning civilization that was more advanced than her people in many ways, but completely unprepared for serious conflict. Their weapons technology had stagnated centuries ago. Their military doctrine focused on peacekeeping rather than warfare. Most significantly, their entire society seemed built around the assumption that serious threats no longer existed. It's almost tragic, Commander Okafor observed as he reviewed the probe data. They've built something beautiful here. Look at these environmental restoration projects. This medical technology. These cultural exchanges. In other circumstances, we'd be honored to join something like this. Captain Chen nodded grimly. But circumstances are what they are. Show me the military analysis. The holographic display shifted to show the Council's defensive capabilities. The numbers were impressive in terms of raw technology, but the strategic assessment painted a troubling picture. The galactic civilization possessed powerful weapons and advanced shielding, but they were spread thin across thousands of worlds. Their fleet formations were optimized for patrol duties and ceremonial functions rather than concentrated combat operations. More importantly, their military leadership had no experience with actual warfare. They had spent generations learning to resolve conflicts through negotiation and economic pressure. The concept of an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with or bought off seemed to be completely foreign to their thinking. "They're sheep," muttered Lieutenant Commander Torres from the tactical station. "Peaceful, intelligent, accomplished sheep who've forgotten that wolves exist." "That's not fair, Torres," Captain Chen replied. "They've accomplished something we never could. They've created a truly peaceful civilization. The problem is that peace only works when everyone agrees to be peaceful." As if summoned by her words, the long-range communication array detected a new signal from the Deep Space Monitoring Network. The humans had been intercepting and decrypting Council communications for weeks, building detailed profiles of their technology and social structures. This new signal was different. It was an emergency broadcast from one of the outer monitoring stations. "Captain," Communications Officer Park announced, "Station Omega 12 is reporting massive energy signatures detected beyond the galactic rim. Multiple large objects approaching at significant velocity. They're requesting immediate Council military response." Captain Chun felt a chill run down her spine. The objects Omega 12 had detected weren't human. Their probes had identified the same signatures weeks ago, and the analysis had confirmed their worst fears. The Devourers had found this galaxy. The humans had first encountered evidence of the Devourers 30 years into their journey, when they discovered the remains of the Kethlar system. An entire solar system had been stripped clean of resources, its planets reduced to lifeless husks, its stars somehow diminished and dying. The level of destruction had been absolute and systematic. Since then, their deep space telescopes had tracked the Devourers' progress across multiple galaxies. The pattern was always the same. A galaxy-spanning civilization would flourish for millennia, reaching heights of technological and cultural achievement that inspired awe. Then, the Devourers would arrive, and within a few decades, nothing would remain but empty systems and dying stars. The humans had tried to warn other civilizations they encountered during their journey, but most species refused to believe such a threat existed. A few had taken the warnings seriously and begun preparations, but the humans had no way of knowing if those preparations would be sufficient. Now the Devourers had found this galaxy, and the humans found themselves in an impossible position. They had come here seeking resources and new worlds for their people, but they couldn't simply stand aside and watch an entire galactic civilization be destroyed. Analysis suggests the Devourer fleet will reach the outer systems in approximately 18 months, Commander Okafor reported. The Council's current defensive posture will be completely inadequate. They don't even have contingency plans for this scale of threat. Captain Chun made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Open a channel to the Galactic Council. It's time to make contact. The first direct communication between humanity and the galactic civilization occurred during an emergency session of the Council Security Committee. Admiral Kexthal was reviewing the reports from the outer monitoring stations when his aide announced an incoming transmission from an unknown source. "Admiral," the aide said nervously, "we're receiving a signal from the unidentified objects our research stations detected. They're requesting immediate audience with the Council leadership. The signal is coming through on military frequencies, and they claim to have urgent information about the new threats detected at stations Omega 12 and Omega 7. Admiral Kexthal's 6 arms moved in a gesture of surprise and confusion. "Unknown vessels have access to our military communication codes. Patch me through immediately." The main display activated, showing the bridge of an alien vessel unlike anything in the Council databases. The beings operating the ship appeared to be bipedal mammals with unusual skin coloration and primitive-looking equipment. Their vessel's bridge showed clear signs of battle damage and makeshift repairs. Captain Chin appeared on the screen, her expression grave and professional. "I am Captain Sarah Chun of the human vessel Indomitable. We've been monitoring your communications and have urgent information about the fleet approaching your galaxy. You're in immediate danger, and your current defensive preparations will not be sufficient." Admiral Kexthal's translator system struggled with the alien language patterns, but the meaning came through clearly enough. "You claim knowledge of these approaching objects? How is this possible? Our sensors indicate your technology is centuries behind our own capabilities." "Because we've encountered these enemies before," Captain Chin replied. "We call them Devourers. They've destroyed every major civilization in 3 neighboring galaxies over the past millennium. Your galaxy is their next target, and you have less than 2 years to prepare." The Security Committee erupted in confusion and debate. Some members demanded that the unknown aliens be captured for interrogation. Others suggested they were somehow connected to the approaching threat. A few voices called for immediate military action against the primitive-looking vessels. Dr. Yela Chevron, monitoring the session from her research laboratory, found herself fascinated by the implications. These creatures claimed to have survived encounters with a galaxy-destroying force. Their technology appeared crude, but their vessel showed clear evidence of extensive combat modifications. Most intriguingly, they seemed to understand military concepts that the Council had abandoned centuries ago. Admiral Kexthal, Dr. Chevron interjected over the committee's communication channel. Request permission to conduct detailed scans of the alien vessel. If they have indeed encountered these devourers previously, their technology and experience might provide crucial intelligence. The debate continued for hours, but eventually, scientific curiosity and the mounting evidence of an approaching threat won out over caution and prejudice. The humans were granted permission to dock with Research Platform Gamma, one for preliminary contact and intelligence sharing. When Captain Chun and her first officers disembarked at the research platform, they immediately became the subject of intense scientific scrutiny. The Council scientists were amazed by the humans' unusual physiology and their apparent adaptation to high-gravity, high-radiation environments. Their equipment was indeed primitive by galactic standards, but it was also incredibly robust and showed signs of constant battlefield modification. Your species appears to have evolved on what we would classify as a death world, Dr. Chevron observed during the initial examination. High gravity, dangerous radiation levels, extreme weather patterns. How did your civilization develop space travel under such conditions? We developed space travel because of those conditions, Captain Chen replied. Our world taught us that survival requires constant adaptation and preparation for the worst possible scenarios. When we achieved interstellar capability, we discovered that the universe is just as dangerous as our home planet, only on a larger scale. The cultural exchange that followed was unlike anything the Council had experienced. The humans described technologies born from desperation, redundant systems designed to function when primary systems failed, weapons that prioritized reliability over elegance, defensive strategies based on the assumption that any enemy would fight to total destruction. Most disturbing to the Council representatives was the humans' casual acceptance of massive casualties as an acceptable cost of survival. They spoke of entire colonies sacrificing themselves to buy time for evacuation fleets, of military units holding impossible positions until they were completely destroyed, of research teams working on critical projects until the moment their laboratories were overrun. You're describing a civilization built around constant warfare, Dr. Chevron observed with a mixture of horror and fascination. How do your people maintain social cohesion under such conditions? We maintain cohesion because we understand what happens when we don't, Commander Okafor replied. We've seen what happens to peaceful civilizations when they encounter something that can't be negotiated with or deterred. Sometimes survival requires becoming something harder than you want to be. As the intelligence sharing sessions continued, the scope of the approaching threat became clear. The Devourer fleet was massive, numbering in the hundreds of thousands of vessels. Their technology was based on principles that neither humans nor Council scientists fully understood, but its effects were unmistakable: complete resource extraction and systematic destruction of all life. The humans shared their tactical analysis of Devourer capabilities, gathered from studying the remains of destroyed systems. The Devourers used some form of nanotechnology to break down matter at the molecular level, converting entire planets into raw materials for their fleet. Their vessels could repair battle damage almost instantly and seemed to grow stronger as they consumed resources. Most terrifyingly, the Devourers appeared to be completely non-communicative. No civilization had ever reported successful contact with them. They arrived, they consumed, they moved on. There was no evidence they were even aware of the civilizations they destroyed as anything more than obstacles to resource extraction. How did your people survive encounters with such enemies? Admiral Kexthal asked during one of the briefing sessions. Captain Chen's expression grew grim. Barely. We lost most of our colonies and about 60% of our population. The only reason any of us survived is that we had already learned to expect the worst and plan accordingly. When the Devourers hit our outer systems, we were ready to abandon them and fight a running battle while our civilian population evacuated. The briefings continued for days, with human experts explaining defensive strategies that seemed almost incomprehensible to the Council military. They spoke of sacrificing entire star systems to delay enemy advances, of using civilian infrastructure as weapons platforms, of tactics that prioritize survival over victory. Gradually, a terrible truth emerged from the discussions. The galactic civilization possessed superior technology and vastly greater resources than the humans, but they lacked the fundamental understanding of warfare necessary to use those advantages effectively. Their peaceful society had produced brilliant scientists, gifted diplomats, and skilled administrators, but it had not produced soldiers. The humans, by contrast, were a civilization of soldiers. Every aspect of their society had been shaped by the need to survive in a hostile universe. Their technology was crude, but battle-tested. Their tactics were brutal, but effective. Most importantly, they understood that sometimes there were enemies that couldn't be reasoned with, only defeated. As reports continued to arrive from the outer monitoring stations confirming the approach of the Devourer fleet, a consensus began to emerge among the Council leadership. The galaxy's only hope of survival lay in learning from these primitive aliens who had somehow managed to survive in a universe where survival was not guaranteed. The decision was made to grant the humans temporary citizenship and full access to Council technology and resources. In return, the humans would share their military expertise and help prepare the galactic civilization for a war unlike anything it had ever imagined. The age of peace was ending, but perhaps, with the humans' help, the age of extinction could be avoided. The ultimate test was about to begin, and the galaxy's greatest hope came from the most unlikely source. A species of Deathworlders who had learned that sometimes the only way to preserve civilization was to become uncivilized enough to fight for it. The transformation of the galaxy began immediately after the Council's emergency vote to accept human military advisors. What followed was the most comprehensive mobilization effort in galactic history, guided by principles that challenged every assumption the peaceful civilizations had held about warfare and survival. Captain Chun found herself appointed as Special Military Advisor to the Galactic Defense Initiative, a position that had never existed before because the concept of galaxy-wide military coordination was entirely new. Her first recommendation shocked the Council leadership: evacuate all non-essential populations from the Outer Rim territories immediately. You're asking us to abandon nearly 50 inhabited systems, Admiral Kexthal protested during the emergency planning session. These are established colonies with billions of citizens. We can't simply order them to leave their homes. You can't order them to die uselessly either, Captain Chun replied bluntly. The Devourer advance will hit your outer territories first. Those systems will fall no matter what defenses you put there. The only question is whether their populations escape or get consumed along with everything else. The debate that followed revealed the fundamental disconnect between human military thinking and galactic civilization values. The Council representatives couldn't comprehend abandoning territory without a fight. The humans couldn't comprehend wasting lives defending positions that couldn't be held. Dr. Yila Chevron, who had become the primary liaison between the scientific community and the human advisors, found herself caught between two completely different worldviews. Her scientific training told her the human analysis was logical and based on solid evidence, but her cultural conditioning made their recommendations seem almost barbaric. Perhaps we could establish strong defensive positions in the outer systems, she suggested during one planning session. Our technology is superior to anything you've encountered. Surely that counts for something. Commander Okafor, who had been placed in charge of defensive strategy planning, shook his head grimly. Doctor, we thought the same thing when we first encountered the Devourers. Our weapons were better than theirs individually, but they had quantities we couldn't match and technologies we didn't understand. By the time we realized our mistake, we'd lost 3 entire star systems and most of our fleet. The humans began implementing what they called the layered defense strategy, a concept that was revolutionary to the galactic military mind. Instead of trying to hold every position, they would create multiple falling backlines of defense, each designed to delay the enemy advance while extracting maximum cost in resources and time. The first layer would be automated defense platforms equipped with the most advanced Council weapons technology, designed to operate independently and fight until destroyed. The second layer would be mobile fleet elements that would engage the enemy, inflict damage, and withdraw before being overwhelmed. The third layer would be heavily fortified systems that could hold out for extended periods while civilian evacuations proceeded. Most controversially, the humans insisted on preparing scorched earth protocols for every system that would eventually be abandoned. Rather than leaving infrastructure intact for the Devourers to consume, everything of potential value would be destroyed during withdrawal. "You're asking us to destroy centuries of development," protested Representative VYX Howe of the Meridian Collective. "These colonies represent the life work of millions of beings. The cultural heritage alone is irreplaceable." Captain Chen's response was delivered with the kind of cold pragmatism that had allowed humanity to survive their darkest hours. "Representative, cultural heritage means nothing if there's no culture left to remember it. We can rebuild colonies. We can't rebuild extinct civilizations." While the military preparations proceeded, the humans also began what they called hardening the galactic population for the reality of total war. This involved training programs that taught civilians how to survive in hostile environments, evacuation procedures that assumed normal transportation infrastructure would be destroyed, and resource rationing systems designed to support populations under siege conditions. The psychological impact of these preparations was enormous. For the first time in centuries, galactic citizens were forced to confront the possibility that their peaceful, prosperous society might not be permanent. The comfortable assumptions of perpetual progress and universal cooperation gave way to harsh questions about survival priorities and acceptable losses. Some sectors of galactic society resisted the changes completely. The Peaceful Unity movement, led by prominent council figures, argued that the humans were using fear to transform their civilization into something militaristic and brutal. They proposed attempting diplomatic contact with the Devourers, believing that any intelligence capable of interstellar travel must be capable of reason. The humans didn't prevent these diplomatic attempts, but they continued their military preparations while the Council's most skilled negotiators attempted to establish communication with the approaching fleet. The results were exactly what human experience had predicted: complete silence from the Devourers, followed by systematic destruction of the ships that had approached them. This failure of diplomacy marked a turning point in galactic opinion. Even the most optimistic council members were forced to acknowledge that they were facing an enemy that couldn't be negotiated with, bought off, or convinced to change course. The only option was resistance. As the first Devourer scouts entered the outer territories, the Galactic Defense Forces received their first practical education in human military doctrine. The automated defense platforms performed exactly as designed, inflicting significant damage on the enemy advance units before being overwhelmed and destroyed. The Council military leaders watched in amazement as the humans showed no emotional reaction to losing their carefully constructed defenses. "How can you be so calm about this, Dr. Chevron asked Commander Okafor as they watched the tactical displays showing the loss of the outermost defense line. "Because this is exactly what we expected to happen," he replied. "Those platforms bought us 3 days and cost the enemy approximately 15% of their advance force. That's a successful operation by our standards." The mobile fleet actions that followed demonstrated the difference between the human understanding of naval warfare and the galactic approach. Council vessels were designed for decisive battles between roughly equal forces, where superior technology and tactical skill would determine the outcome. Human-designed operations assumed overwhelming enemy superiority and focused on hit-and-run tactics designed to inflict damage while preserving friendly forces. Captain Chen personally led the first major fleet action against a Devourer task force approaching the Kepler mining colonies. Her mixed human council squadron used what she called swarm tactics, with small groups of ships making coordinated attacks from multiple directions while never allowing the enemy to concentrate their superior firepower effectively. The battle lasted 18 hours and resulted in the destruction of nearly 60% of the human council force, but it also eliminated a Devourer task force that intelligence estimated contained enough firepower to devastate an entire star system. More importantly, it bought enough time for the complete evacuation of the Kepler colonies, saving over 12 million civilian lives. The galactic media struggled to interpret the results. By their traditional measures, losing 60% of an attacking force would constitute a devastating defeat. The humans presented it as a significant victory because the strategic objective had been achieved and the enemy had paid a higher cost in irreplaceable resources. "We're learning to think differently about victory," Admiral Kexthel admitted during a private conversation with Captain Chun after the battle. "Your people measure success by survival rather than conquest. It's a difficult concept for us to accept, but the results speak for themselves." As the Devourer advance continued, the human military philosophy began to take hold throughout the Galactic Defense Forces. Officers who had been trained to seek decisive victories learned to accept tactical defeats that achieved strategic objectives. Crews who had expected to win through superior technology learned to value resilience and adaptability over raw firepower. The transformation wasn't limited to military thinking. The necessity of constant evacuation and resettlement taught civilian populations to value mobility over permanent infrastructure. The resource constraints imposed by total war taught entire civilizations to prioritize necessity over luxury. Most fundamentally, the constant threat of annihilation taught the galaxy's peaceful peoples to accept that survival sometimes required making choices that their moral philosophy had never contemplated. The climactic moment of the war came when the Devourer main fleet reached the core worlds, the ancient heart of galactic civilization, where the most advanced worlds and the most important cultural sites were located. The human-trained defense forces had managed a fighting withdrawal across nearly a third of the galaxy, but everyone understood that this was where the final stand would have to be made. The Battle of Zentari Prime lasted for 6 months and involved nearly every remaining military asset in the galaxy. The Devourers brought their full technological might to bear, deploying weapon systems that could destroy planets and defensive capabilities that seemed to violate known laws of physics. The galactic forces, trained in human tactics and armed with the best technology their civilization could produce, fought with a desperation and determination that their peaceful ancestors could never have imagined. The turning point came when Dr. Yila Chevron and her research team, working with captured Devourer technology, discovered the fundamental weakness that the humans had theorized but never been able to exploit. The Devourer's nanotechnology systems, while incredibly powerful, required constant communication with central control nodes to function effectively. Disrupting these communications would cause their technology to break down at the molecular level. The final assault was planned jointly by Captain Chun and Admiral Kexthal, combining human tactical ruthlessness with galactic technological capability. A mixed force of human and council vessels would penetrate the Devourer fleet formation and deploy specially designed quantum disruption weapons against the control nodes, while the main defense fleet held their attention in a series of costly but necessary diversionary attacks. The operation succeeded, but at tremendous cost. Over 70% of the galactic fleet was destroyed in the final battle, including many of the human vessels that had guided the galaxy through its transformation. Captain Chun herself was lost when her ship, the Indomitable, sacrificed itself to ensure the quantum weapons reached their targets. In the aftermath of victory, the survivors found themselves ruling over a galaxy that had been fundamentally changed by the experience of total war. Nearly 200 worlds had been evacuated or destroyed. Billions of lives had been lost. The peaceful, prosperous civilization that had existed before the Devourer arrival was gone forever. But something new had taken its place. The beings who had survived the ultimate test understood things about themselves and their universe that their ancestors had never imagined. They had learned that peace was not the natural state of the cosmos, but a precious achievement that had to be constantly defended. They had discovered that civilization was not guaranteed to survive, but could be preserved through sacrifice and determination. Most importantly, they had learned the lesson that humanity had carried across the void between galaxies, that sometimes the only way to remain worthy of peace was to be prepared for war. Admiral Kexthal, now bearing the title of Supreme Commander of Galactic Defense, stood in the rebuilt council chambers looking out at a galaxy that bore little resemblance to the one he had helped to pacify centuries earlier. The new civilization was harder, more vigilant, and perhaps less idealistic than its predecessor. But it was also stronger, more resilient, and infinitely more capable of surviving in a universe where threats like the Devourers might emerge without warning. The humans gave us the greatest gift possible, Dr. Chevron observed during the memorial service for Captain Chun and the other fallen heroes. They taught us that survival is not guaranteed, and that everything we value must be earned through courage and sacrifice. We will never forget that lesson. The monument erected in humanity's honor bore a simple inscription, chosen by unanimous vote of the surviving council members. They came from the darkness between galaxies and taught us that light must sometimes fight to survive. The galaxy had passed its ultimate test, transformed from a peaceful collection of advanced civilizations into something harder and more capable. The age of easy peace was over, but the age of earned survival had begun. And, in the depths of space, new human ships were already being built, carrying with them the knowledge that somewhere in the cosmos, there might be other galaxies that needed to learn the same harsh lessons about the price of civilization. The Deathworlders had done their work, and the galaxy would never be the same.